Stan, we're live.
And that was the world famous voice of Larry the Liberty Guy. Thank you, Larry, for the introductory music from John Kiley at Fenway Park. Take me out to the ball game, and we welcome you to In the Dugout. And I am your host, Mike Stenhouse, and I'll just go with the traditional Harvard baseball cap, not because I'm bragging so much about being a Harvard economics guy. I just think it's a good hat. It's good, fits me well. It's comfortable, and it stands up. It's one of the few hats I have that isn't squished after all these years. I got to get some new headwear. I think you guys are probably getting tired of the same old caps. Okay, today on the show, two guests. The bottom of the hour, we'll have Dr. Andrew Bostom, who will be talking about all things COVID, and we will pose to him the big question of the day with regard to this pandemic. So stay tuned for that. He'll be joining us towards the bottom of the hour. The other guest today is me. I haven't had a long chance to bloviate in a while. We've had some great guests on, and I know you'd much rather hear from guests than from me, but today I've got a lot to comment on, and there's a lot more that I don't even have a chance to comment on today. So a couple just personal notes before we get into more substantive stuff. You know, I never thought I could be there would be a more obnoxious commercial ad than Mike and his pillows or Marie and her weight loss, especially Mike. They're just everywhere. But I got to tell you, have you been listening to the radio? I listen to WPRO, and there's this ad on their radio ad, and there's this guy and woman, man and woman, and they're trying to buy your condemned or old or unwanted houses or something like that. They say they're real estate speculators. But this woman tries to put on a Rhode Island accent. And I have never heard anything so obnoxious in my life. I mean, it's clearly a contrived and fake accent. I mean, do you know have you heard the commercial? I mean, it's 401, give us a call, 401. I mean, listen, I'm terrible at doing impersonations, accents, or anything like that. But I have to turn it off. I have to get up and leave the room or turn the radio down or something. It is so annoying. And it's not a natural accent. This is it's some weird mix of Maine, England, and a touch of Rhode Island. And it's so contrived and so fake and so obnoxious. Now, listen, we all know that the Rhode Island accent is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. I've been busted my whole life about it. You know, when I was a student at Harvard, when I went out and traveled the country playing ball, I mean, everybody talked about my accent. I even think it's been tempered a bit with all the traveling I've done and living in, you know, the South, like Memphis, and the West, like Wichita, and in Montreal and Minnesota. You know, so I even think my Rhode Island accent has been tempered a bit, but it's a beautiful thing, that Rhode Island accent. What this woman on the radio is doing, it's just horrendous. So, hey, if you know what I'm talking about, you know, write a comment there in the Louise says she's British. You can hear her slip 2 times. Yeah, it sounds like she's a Brit trying to sound like a Rhode Islander, but she really ends up sounding a lot more like Maine or something weird. But it's not Rhode Island, and it is obnoxious. Okay, I know you can't see it from there. I'll try to, but I'm wearing a new jacket today with a pin that just happened to be on there. It's a great pin. It's got both the American flag and the Taiwanese flag. All right, why? Well, there's a great fundraising event I get invited to every year. Well, when we used to have fundraising banquets, the Rhode Island Aviation Hall of Fame. And I don't know the website, but you ought to go to their website. Every year they induct 8 or 10 or 12 aviators who've done historical things. Many of, not all wartime, many of them are wartime. Some of them were just technological feats or pilot feats or something like that. But the stories are incredible, especially the war stories. So as I remember, in World War II. And the cool thing about this pin is that every year, and I probably went 6, 7 years in a row before the pandemic, representatives from the Taiwanese government would come to Rhode Island just to be part of this dinner because they were so grateful to the Rhode Island and American aviators who defended them during World War II. And if I recall correctly, and I might be wrong in this, but I'm close. Maybe even some of Doolittle's Raiders, when they retrofit and they strip down all those B-52 or whatever, or B-1 bombers or whatever, they were the flying fortresses. They stripped them down so they could take off from an aircraft carrier. This was right after Pearl Harbor, so they could at least drop some bombs on Tokyo and on Japan, even though they knew they couldn't go back to the carrier. And I think some of those planes end up being ditched. They didn't have enough fuel to make it out and back. So they had a ditch in China or China's properties. And I think some of them ditched and died in Taiwan. And as the story goes, these American aviators, many of whom came from Rhode Island, or some of whom anyway, were heroes and still are heroes and celebrated today by the Taiwanese government in the same day we celebrate our, revolutionary or Civil War heroes. So they make the effort to come all the way across the pond, that big old pond, to be in Rhode Island for this dinner, and they make these pins especially for those occasions. And I think that's like so cool. I wish I could tell you the story properly. If you look up the Rhode Island Aviation Hall of Fame, I don't even know. I go to their banquets. I don't even think I've ever been to their website, but there might be some stories you can find if you're interested in that story. If anyone knows is a good World War II buff, go ahead, type the comments in, and I'll do it. Of course, we want to send our wishes of freedom to the people of Taiwan and Hong Kong who are under, well, I don't know if we can quite say direct threat yet, but under threat anyway from the communist Chinese for the Chinese, the CCCP to take full control and impose full communism on Hong Kong, on Taiwan. So we should keep those people in our prayers and hope that they can maintain freedom and prosperity. We all know Hong Kong is a very prosperous place because it's a free place. Okay, moving on. We had dueling press conferences today. Governor McKee on his weekly COVID, and Joe Biden, our president, had his first press conference ever since being president today. McKee, I don't know. He's so low energy. He's saying the right things, I think, on the COVID, but it's what he's not saying that troubles me. We're going to talk more about that in a few more minutes. There's more than COVID to running this government. And like we talked a couple of shows ago, the executive branch is now 100% COVID, it seems, without any oversight, without any check or balance from the General Assembly. And the General Assembly is now 100% about the progressive left agenda, without any oversight, without any check and balance, without even any commentary from the executive branch. That's not balanced government. That is terrible democracy. And Governor Dan McKee has hardly made any issue of Rhode Island's economy. He didn't even have the time to put together his own budget. He took Gina Raimondo's, what he called status quo budget, made a few little modifications to appease the left here or there, and that was it. There's more to government than this damn COVID crisis. And this governor needs to get engaged. The General Assembly is about to run roughshod over our economy with this Green New Deal, with the TCI gas tax, with income taxes, with minimum wage mandates, or with our election, with their brutal ideas for election process reforms. There's all kinds of threats to our Second Amendment rights. And with a Speaker of the House who will now let much of this through, and Joseph Shekarchi, Governor McKee has got to start becoming a counterforce. He's got to start becoming the moderate, at least the non-socialist that we all think he is. He's got to become the advocate for small business that for years he says he is. But he's doing nothing of the sort. Absolutely nothing. Except COVID. That's important, but it's not everything. This whole COVID thing is thrown, like we said yesterday, COVID response, the medical science, the medical experts, their has to be balanced with economic considerations, social and societal considerations. It's not just one thing. And in that same way, Governor McKee is showing no balance in his leadership. It's all COVID. And that threat appears to be on, I don't think it really matters what he does. I mean, sure, it might matter how quickly we get some vaccinations out. But for the most part, this appears as if this is about to die out, regardless of what we do, at least in this state and in many parts of the world. So I don't know. So I'm disappointed in McKee, just very short, very seemingly disengaged with other critical issues. As far as Joe Biden, I'm not going to comment much on that, but mostly my comment there. I mean, for anyone who, he had some gaffes. He's not all there, but he got through it. I'll give him a C- for style, and of course an F for content, because his policy ideas are just so whacked right now. I don't even know if they're his ideas or not. I doubt it. But my biggest criticism of that press conference was the media, at least for the part I heard. I mean, the first question set the tone, basically saying, Republicans are blocking election reforms, and they're blocking equal rights, and they're blocking, immigration reforms. How are you going to deal with all this obstruction you're getting from the other side? And it's Biden's policies that are causing all this. It's unbelievable. These softball questions, these fake news questions. And pretty much every media question was framed that way. They covered a few important topics. Biden did take some questions. I think he took 10 questionnaires, most of whom had a couple of follow-up questions. But they were all the questions were positioned on assumptions that are false. The false narratives we've been talking to you about for months and months and months, that the left creates this false narrative, this false victim class. It gets perpetrated by their allies in academia and in their advocacy groups on the ground. The media perpetrates it. And all of a sudden, lawmakers are making laws to address a problem that doesn't exist. This is the pattern we're in. Joe Biden today actually blamed the immigration crisis on Donald Trump. It's unbelievable. I mean, this never land we've talked about, these liberal leftists literally live in never land. Immigration had slowed, the wall was going up, Biden changes everything, immigration accelerates, and somehow they claim that's Donald Trump's fault. It's unbelievable. So let's talk, just a few minutes on that. We mostly deal with local issues, but every now and then we've got to weigh in on some federal issues. So here is, you may have seen these pictures. Now, what does that look like to you? I mean, those are actually bodies. Now, they look like dead bodies in body bags, but they're not. Those are just sleeping immigrants crammed together in some kind of retention, whatever you want, temporary facility. Now, can you imagine? These were leaked pictures, by the way. Can you imagine if that picture came out when Donald Trump was president? I just imagine that. So, who's really, it's a crisis. whether it was under Trump, whether it was under Biden, these immigrants coming in, there's no good solution. They just shouldn't be coming in. That's why we have to put up the wall to stop this kind of, I don't know if that's inhumane or not, but it's certainly getting treated like cattle. I guess that is inhumane by definition. Here's a tweet from Governor Greg Abbott of Texas. And I agree. The Biden administration has turned the humanitarian crisis into a complete disaster. I guess in some of those facilities, like he says here, no clean and running water. We do know there have been reports of major COVID outbreaks among those facilities. Now, if those are young, healthy people, we don't know if that's leading to severe illness or death. That's ultimately the problem. But the open border policies of Joe Biden clearly have led to this crisis. Not the policies of Donald Trump. It's insane. But then, for all each of those people who you see sleeping in one of those, I don't even know what they are, space age blankets kind of thing. Then there's this. Yeah, because we've all heard, right? They're renting and buying since people aren't traveling using hotels too much. They're renting out whole hotels and putting immigrants in hotels. And as this meme or as this Share Square points out, that's what America's doing for the illegal immigrants, while our own heroes, our own United States war veterans, are often homeless and sleeping on the streets. Does this make sense to you? Doesn't make sense to me. Okay. You may have seen the shocking story. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Americans have no right to carry a firearm. Think about that. No right to carry a firearm. I didn't read the ruling. I imagine they say it's okay to own a firearm as long as you keep it in your home. But if you leave your home, you have to be defenseless. Now, this is that liberal wacko Ninth Court of Appeals. So I doubt very much that, at least I hope, that at least for the time being, this ruling isn't going to go too much further or really take effect. But this is how the left works. They just keep pressing. They just keep pressing. They might get rebuffed, this year. They might gain a Ninth Circuit opinion next year, but they keep pushing and they keep pushing and they keep pushing and chipping away. And eventually, just like they're trying to do here in Rhode Island with so many anti-Second Amendment bills, when we talked with Frank Sicoscio, last week about that, so many bills that they just keep chipping away. And eventually one of them is going to break through. One of them is going to get adopted, going to become law, and your second rights are going to be diminished. Okay, let's spend, I got two more topics before we bring on Dr. Andy Boston to cover. First of all, the continuing story about the Green New Deal that passed the House, similar bill passed the Senate. Within the next week or so, they'll each pass each other's bill, or one of them will pass, and it'll be transmitted to the governor, perhaps by 7 to 10 days from now. And then Governor McKee has a big decision to make. This will be his first really big decision. As I mentioned earlier, what's he going to do with this bill? Is he going to do nothing? In which case, after 10 days, it just automatically becomes law without a governor's signature. Is he going to sign it at some point during that 10 days? Or is he going to veto it and then work hard to try to sustain his veto? He would need to flip 9 Democrats, well, maybe 1 Republican and 8 Democrats in the Rhode Island House. We gave you some misinformation in last day or two on this. I was misinformed. It's not a 2/3 majority to override a veto. It's only 60%, which means you need 40% or 31 votes against the bill to sustain a potential Governor McKee veto. They got 22 no votes on the floor the other day, Wednesday, which means 9 Democrats would have to be flipped. It sounds like a lot, but according to my sources, it's really not that many. Apparently, there were dozens of Democrats who asked, and again, because of the emails you sent, because of the forms you filled out to send emails to lawmakers and to the governor, we put a lot of pressure on them. And a lot of Democrat lawmakers, from my sources, asked the speaker to pull the bill temporarily so they could have a chance to study it, debate it, and think about it more. But Shekarchi dug in and said, no, we're moving forward with this. And he's even sent out an email to say, listen, I'm serious. I want this passed. But there are a couple of dozen, 20, 24 dozen, you only need 9 Democrats who have serious questions about this legislation, as they should. So the point being, if Dan McKee makes the smart decision to veto this bill and then fight to sustain his veto and help Republicans or other Democrats who voted no to flip 9 others, he could achieve a major victory. Why is that victory important? Because his credibility is at stake. For years, he's been saying he's an advocate, he's a friend to the small business community. If he lets this bill go through, or if he does anything short of fighting his butt off to veto this and sustain a veto, his credibility with the small business community is gone in a flash. Before he even gets started with his administration, it's gone. This bill is a small business killer, raising energy costs, will cost jobs, will cost profits, will cause businesses to flee the state. This, a critical moment, and he's given no indication because, as we said earlier, he's completely disengaged from anything but COVID right now. At least he appears to be. And it's time he get on the saddle, get off the fence, and start showing some leadership. I want to show you a form. We have a brand new form to send out. So in the past, you've been saying, hey, I don't like the TCI gas tax, and hey, I don't like the Green New Deal. Well, the Green New Deal's passed. So now we've got a new form, as you can see here. Tell Governor McKee to veto the Ocean State's version of the Green New Deal. And the URL is simple, rifreedom.org/energy choices. Even if you filled out the other form, this is a new form. This will send emails to the governor and to 9 or 10 Democrats who we feel could be convinced to sustain a potential veto and flip their votes on this. So rifreedom.org/energy choices. Of course, it will all be moot if Governor McKee refuses to issue a veto in the first place. But I just can't believe that he can ever talk about being a friend of small business if he doesn't fight hard to get a veto sustained on this bill. All right, last topic before we go to Dr. Boston. Many of you probably started getting your stimulus checks, your COVID relief stimulus checks. And many of you think it's free money. No, it's easy to think. They tell you it's free money, right? I found this image. I don't know if that's who it is, but it kind of looks like a modern day Marxist to me. And this really is Marxism, right? What's happening here? Let's just bribe the populace with money. Let's get them drunk on government money so they'll continue to look for us and vote for us to sustain their livelihoods. Well, the level of livelihood they want to sustain you at is barely sustainable, barely livable, but they hope you're stupid enough to say, hey, I don't have to do much to survive. Since when is survival the American way? We need to thrive. We want to thrive in this country. We want to be free and prosperous in this country. You know, they say there's no such thing as a free lunch. But advocates of the left's new modern monetary theory want you to believe that there is a free lunch. You know, under traditional economic theory, every government dollar that's spent or borrowed must eventually be paid or piled up in national debt or something like that, but with the goal of being eventually repaid and interest accruing on that. But according to these new monetary theorists, governments like America that control our own currency, have a Federal Reserve, and and own our own currency that's not dependent on other countries, that these left-wing socialist economists and monetarists think we can just print as much money as we need to solve whatever social or societal, or more likely political, goal they want. And since states can't print their own money or run massive deficits, I think every state has a balanced budget amendment, the federal government's going to print money and just give it to the states to spend. So the federal government will print money for the states, which is exactly what they're doing here. State of Rhode Island is going to get close to $2 billion to pretty much do whatever it wants with. Many cities and towns. Cranston's going to get 27 million. Providence, 130 million. Some of the smaller towns will get, single digit millions. But it's not free money. It's a myth that this is free. It's a popular myth, but it's a myth nonetheless. And in virtually every other country where they just printed money, and in Venezuela is just the most recent example of the many, this reckless approach to monetary policy inevitably, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but inevitably leads to disaster. It leads to a devaluation of the currency. The dollar, any dollars you hold are going to become less worth because inflation is going to go up rapidly. So you still might have $1,000 in your bank account, but that $1,000 is going to buy you 1/10 of what you can buy now. Imagine when loaves of bread are $7 or $8 just for a slice white bread or something like that, or more. This is what happens. And again, then the reason the socialist left likes this, like we said earlier, they want to bribe you with money because they're not concerned about the long term. They're not concerned about that eventuality, which is years away. These politicians, these corrupt, misguided, are only concerned about the near term in the next election. If they can look good saying I gave you some free money and you're too stupid to know otherwise, well, to them, that's good, regardless of the long-term effect it will have on us, our kids, or our grandkids. So this is an illusion that this money you're getting, mine was deposited in my account. I have a mind to send it back, but I don't know what good that would do. It's not free money. There is still no such thing as a free lunch, despite this modern monetary theory. And it's just part of the Marxist playbook to make you less independent, less self-sufficient, and more dependent on the government. Speaking of dependent on the government, let's bring in Dr. Andy Bostom, who Andy, welcome back to In the Dugout.
Hi, Mike.
So you just heard me finish up about economic dependence on government, but the government wants us to become dependent on them medically as well now, right?
Yes, and they're I wish they were as free with information as they are with taxpayer money, so that we would actually get some real information. But
information is free as far as I know, isn't it? Although they try to charge us for it, don't they?
No, it's our information.
That's right.
Information we're paying for. It's data we're paying for to be collected, whether it's laboratory data or hospitalization data, mortality data. And the press conference today, I think Larry has a clip geared up.
Let's hold off just a minute on that, because I want to set the big stage first with you. All right, if that's okay.
Sure.
So the big question today that we're going to ponder, everything we talk about today, I want to think about in relation to this question. Is there any, I can't even say the word, epidemiological reason? Is that right? Did I say it right? That's a tongue twister, and I had to really think to spit that one out. Is there any epidemiological? See, I couldn't do it. Logical reason. Let me hear you say it.
Epidemiological.
You say you're too practiced at this.
Right.
I can say epidemiologist, but I can't say epidemiological. Anyway, is there any reason medically that we should still be in a state of emergency under emergency powers control of the executive branch?
No, I mean, if you go back to what the original rationale was, is it basically boiled down to the healthcare system being overwhelmed. And, no one in their right mind could argue that the healthcare system is overwhelmed, least of all by COVID at this point. We have the metrics out in front of us. The hospitalizations are down around 100. We had 2 days in a row, Mike, where there was 0 COVID deaths. 0.
Yeah, now we're going to show those numbers in a minute, but you're right. Let's go back to last year. Remember what we were told, right? That 2 weeks to slow the spread, right? That we need to make sure that cases don't go up so fast that we overwhelm our hospital and medical capacity to deal with sick people, right?
Right.
Now, we never reached those falsely projected highs, but the goal was maybe reasonable at the time. We didn't know as much as we know now. Let's slow the spread. Let's make sure we're not overwhelming the capacity. But now they've moved the goalposts, right?
Let's be specific, Mike, because the numbers are shocking. We, in the first wave, and again, you have to give people leeway. It was a relatively unknown virus, even though we know something about coronaviruses. And there was SARS-CoV-1, this is SARS-CoV-2, but still, benefit of the doubt. The projections that were made by Brown University, the Department of Epidemiology, the Department of Health, all the major players that we're seeing, either behind the scenes or now up front, in the case of Dr. Alexander Scott, they were all involved in these models which really shaped the policy. And what did those models say? The more hysterical model said that we would peak around the end of April, beginning of May, at 4,300 beds occupied by COVID patients. That, of course, mandated the construction of overflow facilities, very costly overflow facilities. The more subdued estimate was 2,250. And yet, in that first wave, we peaked at 375 hospitalizations. That was
so they were off by over a magnitude of 15 almost.
They were off 6 to 11-fold, if you want to be exact. And 11-fold being the upper estimate. No one, again, I think this is very important to review. No journalist, other than Ed Acorn, even wrote a story about this. And in fact, it turned out to be the last story he ever wrote for the Providence Journal. None of his so-called journalistic colleagues picked up upon this. None of them questioned the principles about why they were this degree off. And fast forward to where we are now, Mike, one has to presume when you hear what's going on at these press conferences and the interplay between Governor McKee and Dr. Scott and the behind-the-scenes invocations of Dr. Jha, that he's waiting for these same people to give their imprimatur on when the state can fully reopen, drop the mask mandate, et cetera.
Well, and McKee clearly said today, when sort of asked that question, well, when we get maybe 70% of the population vaccinated.
Oh, he gave a number, Mike. He said he wanted 620,000.
All right. So that's roughly the 67%. Right. My point being, a year ago, the goal to slow the spread, to make sure we didn't overwhelm our medical facilities. Okay, you could maybe argue that was reasonable at the time, even though the projections were unreasonable. But now the goal has shifted. They've moved the goalposts. It's not about they're trying to stop the spread of a pandemic, even though the medical facilities are nowhere near capacity.
Exactly.
Right now.
It really sounds like it's been floated out there. I mean, some countries are more open about it, like places like New Zealand. They have a, quote, zero COVID policy. It has nothing to do with the healthcare, but which is a pipe dream and an absurdity, Mike. I mean, chances are that this coronavirus, like the four that before it that circulate, is going to become an endemic, meaning a seasonal strain It already looks to have many of those characteristics. And the idea that you're going to eradicate it is just absurd.
Right. Right. All right. So on that point, before we get to the clip, and I know you're not probably prepared with data on this, but we're now down to 1 or 2 deaths a day where the hospitalizations are dropping by, 3, 4, 5 people every day. We're approaching 100 there. I mean, we have probably just had normal cold or flu seasons where at these rates of death and hospitalizations that this has occurred, and we're not under states of emergency then.
Absolutely. And Mike, the
right,
other,
so you can confirm that, right? That there have been non-pandemic flu seasons that are worse than this.
Yeah, we're actually I think we've hit we're below average mortality, total mortality at this time of year now. So we're in very good shape, Mike. And the other thing that's happening is that one of these 4 circulating common cold causing primarily coronaviruses, actually 2 of them right now, have their own seasonal peak. Now, at least 2 of them have been investigated in terms of how they might cross-react with the standard PCR testing. Okay, this was a methods paper published last spring. At least 2 of the 4 that circulate, and they're sort of at their peak right now, one of their seasonal peaks, cross-react with the PCR assay and can be contributing false positives. So one possible explanation, in addition to high CT values, which we've discussed so many times before, is that this, we've had 6 weeks now. Dr. Scott admitted that today. 6 straight weeks of about 2% positive.
That's a good number, right?
It's a very good number. But now when we see this spike of these seasonal coronaviruses, 2 in particular, who knows if they're contributing false positives that go beyond the idea of high cycle threshold positives.
Well, what we do know is that even though the rate, the number of cases and the positivity rate, which we'll look at in a few minutes, has stayed steady, yet deaths and hospitalizations still are declining, right? So again, either they're false positives or it's young, healthy people who aren't catching it, or right. But it's not,
and that makes sense too.
The spread is not a problem right now, right?
Exactly. And what's important is that so we have this background of so many people having been infected that we have naturally acquired immunity, and that's keeping the spread of the virus low. It doesn't go away, but it's keeping it low. And also, another very positive trend is that the state has done a good job in vaccinating the vulnerable. We can argue about interrupting some of that process with the teachers, et cetera. But the last I looked, we're over 80% for 65 plus. We're over 80% of those people have been vaccinated. That's probably that, and the natural immunity that population has acquired is probably why there's hospitalization rates are plummeting and death rates are going as low as they can go.
All right, let's play the clip. I don't know what clip this is. I know Larry, Liberty Guy, has it.
Oh, can I introduce it?
Yeah, go ahead. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a fantastic exchange between Pat Ford, the libertarian, and the non-journalist who's the only one who acts like a journalist at these press conferences, and Alexander Scott, and her responses and her facial expressions are just classic.
Go ahead, Larry.
Doctor, we talk about micromanagement. A lot of folks have evidenced a lot of frustration. For example, the change from 8 people to 10 people at the table. Now, in a state where, for example, we don't seem to have an agreed upon CTR, cycle time threshold value, in terms of arranging or arriving at our 2% infection rate, at a time when every established clinical trial has denied and disproven the efficacy of using masks. I think there's, what, a dozen
Look at that
out there, randomized trials, thousands of people involved. How do we arrive at these seemingly, how many angels on the needle or pin measurements do we get going from 8 to 10 specifically that has significant impact going forward on business?
We understand the science behind the virus and how the virus spreads. When you have larger groups of people together in close quarters.
They just use that word, science.
Engaging closely.
She's not answering his question, but go ahead.
ventilated areas
Yeah.
with a variant that is continuing
Well, the variant.
A variant.
for transmission is higher. Every step we can take to mitigate against that, to minimize the risk of that type of invisible or otherwise spread, is valuable to.
Invisible or otherwise.
See, again, they're consumed with spread, not the severity of the disease. This is where they've been wrong from day one, right?
Wait, let her go.
We're not still continuing to decline. That means the variant is still present, it
The
is
variant.
spreading, and we need to continue to be cautious in how we're proceeding.
Actually, at a point in time when Rhode Islanders were surveyed, and there was an acknowledged near 96% use of masks. And I'm just using this as one example. I don't want to assess over masks per se. We had one of our biggest spikes. Just continuing restrictions, we seem to have the worst of all worlds here.
Masks are effective. We can go to the next question, Brian.
Yeah, let's ignore it. Yeah, let's ignore it.
That's it. That's it. Masks are effective. So what, Mike? Let me review what he was trying to get into, and it's a layperson, and he did a great job.
Sounds like he's been listening to this show a lot.
Yeah, and we've had some discussions, shall we say? But what he was trying to say is that, look, and I would have presented it this way. I would have said, Dr. Scott and Governor McKee, over the past 12 years, we've had 12 consecutive randomized controlled trials that have evaluated masking in non-medical settings in the community, and have each one of them has found that the masking group did not slow down the rate of respiratory viral infections. An enormous study, the final one of those 12, was actually with COVID-19 itself. On top of that, we have just purely observational data from Rhode Island, which Pat did point out. There was a point on November 2nd, it was reported that 96% of Rhode Islanders wore a mask.
Yeah, among the highest rate in the country, right?
The highest rate.
The highest.
The highest rate in the country. That was right before that Twin Peaks spike that went from the middle of November to the middle of January.
Yeah.
We now have 81% plus of the high-risk population vaccinated. We have therapeutics available for early disease, the monoclonal antibodies. And we have 17 states which have lifted their mask mandates, each one of which, Mike, has a lower per capita COVID-19 death rate than us. We're ready.
But she doesn't want to discuss that, does she?
None of that is discussed. Masks work. Next question.
Right.
This is not appropriate.
Is that science-based? What she's saying?
No, it's Lysenkoist totalitarian type.
It's what?
Lysenko, the Stalin's favorite agronomist who helped starve Russians to death.
Oh, the 5-year plans and all that stuff.
Well, and with pseudoscience, actually,
yeah.
He was supposedly an agronomist who rejected biological genetics. But this is nonsense. The mask is really a talisman, and that's why it's so important, Mike, for these people. The mask is a talisman.
Raccoons.
Yeah, well, it's a.
Take a look. Hold on, I'm showing a funny here.
Okay.
So they want us to be raccoons.
Yeah.
Wear the mask all the time. Wash your hands all the time because of Corona.
Yeah, and Mexico is introducing nasal masks.
Oh,
you saw that one?
I forgot to get a picture of that.
So that you can eat while you have your little bandolero mask on or whatever it is. It's a but the point is that public health officials can make recommendations about marginal, I would say, ineffective interventions like masking. They have no right when there's a body of evidence that they don't work to force them upon people. This is just inappropriate. It's the same thing with all of a sudden we're down to 3 feet. Well, what was the rationale for 6 feet?
The distancing in schools, right? Yeah.
Yes, and so when you tear away the veneer, you see that there's nothing there. There aren't, and in the case of masking, it's worse. We have data that it simply doesn't work. If people feel better about it, fine. No one's stopping them.
So with the if we can end the state of emergency, we can maybe get to a point where mask wearing becomes optional up to each person.
It should be, yeah, it should be optional now, but I mean, the hope would be that certainly by after Easter, it should be brought up. The thing that was alarming though was that Governor McKee was talking about at 620,000 vaccinated, at least with the first dose of the 2-dose regimens, he would reassess. I mean, what better benchmarks does he want than what we have right now? And Dr. Scott said that at least in the most recent sample, given everything that we know, the positive trends, she said that 40% of some genotyping sample that they did was the UK variant. Well, wait a minute. If it's already at 40%, then it is in other states and even higher. Then we're doing really well with
what are we afraid of? Right. Then what are we afraid
really
of?
Well. Mike, the Houston hospital system just uploaded a preprint yesterday, and it came online today, this morning, and I read it, really avidly because it was so interesting. They actually did a mortality study showing that the period they clocked from January 1st to March 7th. The UK variant became predominant in the Houston area, and they had a group of people infected with non-variant versus the variant. There was absolutely no difference in the chief index that we would look at, which was COVID-19 mortality. And in fact, even though the variant folks had higher viral loads, so lower cycle thresholds, yep, they still didn't have any mortality penalty.
All right, so that's the key thing, and that's the point I was just making. Again, so here you see this headline in the Providence Journal, I don't know, today or yesterday, concerned as U.S. cases rise. If mortality was rising, we would be concerned, right? If hospitalizations were rising, we might be concerned.
Mike, there's a concern about this number. I don't want to skip over this. This is significant because we saw this disgusting game played with mortality. Now we're seeing it played with cases. I have a colleague who's a data analyst from New Jersey, which is contributing a lot to this picture right now. And what she found is that New Jersey, which used to backdate, which used to dump in old deaths, is now dumping in old cases. She found over 1,000 cases that began in February. We're almost at the end of March now that were just recently dumped into the system. Georgia found the same thing. So they're playing these games again, Mike. At a certain point, a year.
But it's the wrong metric. Cases, right? That's the wrong metric, right?
But you can't say what's going on now is influenced by cases that they dug up and dumped into the system from February or earlier. This is but they played this game with deaths. Now they were called out about it, and now they're playing this game with cases.
Yeah, since they can't because increased deaths, you can't fudge that. I mean, you can a little bit, yes, if you fake deaths, but people die or they don't, right?
No, it's the dating. You can't make a curve. You can't say, well, how am I doing this week versus the week before if this week you're taking deaths from 3 weeks ago? I mean, it's just you're taking cases from 3 weeks ago. It just doesn't work. It breaks the whole system down.
All right, let's look at the numbers.
Very dubious things.
All right, let's look at the numbers in Rhode Island. So here is the test positivity you referred to earlier.
Right, and you see how flat it's been. It's hovered around 2% for 6 straight weeks.
Are you concerned that that's not going down further?
No, that's the whole point, Mike. And so, in the background, you can see a big spike in human coronaviruses, non-SARS human coronaviruses, and maybe that's contributing to some of this background because we know there's cross-reactivity. But regardless, we have no information. This looks exactly like that period that Todd Kenyon and Chuck Eaton and I analyzed when we finally got those data with your help, with Roland's help, and the cycle thresholds turned out to be very high. So we don't know what this means, and it may not get much lower. It may not get much.
All right. So you're not looking for this to go to zero.
No. Okay. I think it's absurd.
Okay. All right, here's hospitalizations.
I mean, you couldn't ask for a nicer trend now. It's
Just over 100 now in Rhode
going
Island.
down and down and down.
Intensive care, I think we're just in the mid-teens now.
Right, right. And
Okay.
also, Mike, remember, this is still reflecting an overestimate, really, because the Rhode Island Department of Health admits that these are people in the hospital that test positive. They may not be coming in with pneumonias anymore. You know, if they're coming in for an elective procedure and they happen to test positive, the Rhode Island Department of Health rationalizes labeling them COVID because it's more intensive to isolate them, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, this is it. But regardless, it's a very positive trend.
All right, so take a look at this hospital data. Take a look at this mortality data.
We've had 2
with
recent
none.
days with 0 deaths.
And again, the question is this: does this look like a state of emergency that requires dictatorial emergency powers control over our state?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And again, so what are they holding over? There's always a sword of Damocles that they're holding over our head. It's the variants. Well, we're not operating in a vacuum with variants either. There's lots of data on variants, and they don't seem to be, they may be slightly more infectious, but they're not increasing morbidity and mortality.
All right, let's spend our final few minutes just talking generally about vaccines again. So here's my question. You know, I don't put much credibility in them, but there are some people out there just saying, do not take these vaccines if you don't have to. So here's my question. I'm not asking you to advise people to take it or not. But when you see somebody make a statement like that, is there concern, as far as you can tell, because you might have some kind of near-term reaction? We've all seen reports of people just dropping dead or getting sick, or is it really more of a long-term unknown thing that we either have reason or no reason to fear? Where is of these naysayers, is their concern more short-term immediate or long-term we just don't know?
I can't speak for them, Mike. What I can tell you is that it does look like in terms of allergic, so-called anaphylactic reactions, even some odd blood abnormalities that develop, all very rare. Let's preface that. They're all very rare. They still seem to be less rare at this point. It's hard to say, but they still seem to be less rare than what you would get from seasonal flu vaccination programs. They just seem to be a little higher. Now, is some of it because the campaign is just so much more aggressive? We're just vaccinating so many more people. It's really hard to sort out, but the signal seems to be a little bit louder. The other issue is that, you know, these are brand new vaccine platforms. They're still being operating under emergency use.
Would you call them experimental?
Yes, they are. They're explicitly experimental.
All right.
They're operating under emergency use authorizations. None of them have gone through the full licensure process, which takes at least 2 years. So at best, we're about 6 months or so into that. It would take about another, year and a half of data collection and analysis for safety and efficacy to license them. The first were the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, so they're slightly ahead on that trajectory. But it looks like even those two have about 18 months or so to go before the FDA would grant them formal licensure.
All right.
So there are just concerns about newness. I mean, we just don't know, and let's just pray that there are no particularly common and negative long-term side effects, but we simply don't know. The other thing is, Mike, they're starting to talk about. I saw Rutgers University suggesting that kids wouldn't be able to come back on campus in the fall without being vaccinated. That's a lawsuit because again, there's no way that it's going to be approved by FDA as soon as the fall based on the current timetable. And you'd be mandating something which is against federal law. You cannot mandate someone to take an experimental drug or vaccine. And that's a real issue. And on top of that, Mike, the first trials are literally underway now for the lowest age group, for people under 16. That's first happening.
So,
we don't even have an EUA for that yet.
We're going to be talking more about that and looking at results, because, the mandate, the vaccine Nazis are out there. They're trying to implement mandates. And, so I've taken the position, I gave a speech to a Warwick Rotary Club last year. And one of the questions is, what do you think about the pandemics, economic response, shutdowns, and the vaccines? And have you taken a vaccine? So I answered all the other questions, but I said, listen, because I don't want to in any way promote that either socially or by government mandate that people should be shamed or punished or restricted in their freedoms, whether they take a vaccine or not. So in that spirit, and because it's my job as head of a free, constitutional rights, free market think tank, I'm respectfully not going to answer that question and say that's my medical data and it shouldn't matter to any of you.
Right. No,
that was a response they took. So
I think that's perfectly reasonable. I would only add, it should be based, as other therapies, other interventions are based, particularly when there's unknowns, on risk benefit, calculations. So if you're a high risk person, or you're the guardian for someone that's in a nursing home, is institutionalized and is high risk, that would tend to argue in favor of vaccination. But young, healthy people at this point, I don't see any reason for them to be vaccinated unless they are healthy and young, but constantly exposed to people that have heavy viral loads potentially. That's also different.
So I want to take this vaccine Nazi thing to one level lower. And this is not so much a medical question for you, but just you and I talking politics and policy now. So you know how before cigarettes were totally banned, from most public and private places, they used to have smoking sections, right?
Right.
Non-smoking sections, right? Even on airplanes, they used to have a smoking section in the back or wherever it was, and non-smoking the rest. Restaurants have it. I know, and Roland just made a great point here. The Miami Heat basketball team. Now, so this is a private company, and they're saying we're going to create a vaccination section. They're not saying, I don't think they're saying if you don't have a vaccination, you can't come to a game. I don't know that for sure. But what I'm assuming is they're saying, hey, if you're going to feel safer among other vaccinated people, we'll create a vaccine section for you, just like we used to have a smoking section. Now, that might be silly, but as long as you're giving people that choice and option, I guess, and it's not a mandate, I get, or restriction, I guess we could live with that, huh?
Yeah, there's something creepy about it, though, Mike. It really is another form of discrimination. And
well, you could have said the same thing with smokers, right?
Right. Yeah.
We did it. All right. Last question.
But then there should also be a section for people that had the virus. Those people probably have at least as good or better immunity than people that were vaccinated.
Yeah, you could. Just like some restaurants will say you have to wear a mask. Once the mandates go, that's up to them. If they want to restrict the number of people who come,
right, it's also up to the people whether they want.
I'll go eat somewhere else. Thank you very much. Right?
Or you can watch the Heat games on flat screen TV.
All right. Last question, technical one, medical one again. So the fourth vaccine is, I guess, has the AstraZeneca been approved for emergency use in America?
This is an interesting one. Yeah.
All right. So the first two were the mRNA. The Johnson and Moderna and Pfizer. The Johnson & Johnson was something that actually went into the cells of your the nucleus of your DNA. What kind of technically structure does this AstraZeneca one have?
Oh, the AstraZeneca is another adenovirus. It's a chimpanzee adenovirus vector.
Like the
Johnson
& Johnson one.
Johnson & Johnson, yeah. Except it's a different adenovirus. It's a chimpanzee adenovirus that's being used to insert, the I believe it's still also the spike protein gene. So it's another vaccine that interacts directly with the DNA.
And you're still more comfortable with the first two, the mRNA version.
Absolutely. Just on the basis of unknowns. Yeah. I mean, I'd rather be dealing with something that, goes outside the cell nucleus to the protein producing machinery, does its thing there and is degraded, relatively quickly, versus something that goes into the nucleus of cells, interacts with the genome to insert a gene to produce, ultimately to produce the same protein.
Now, when you say degraded relatively quickly, we talking days, weeks,
Hours
months?
to days is
Hours to days. Wow. Okay.
is what is said. We don't know what happens in terms of how, it's just an unknown. I mean, it's integrated into the genome, and there it is. So to me, that's quite different. And like I said, the only experience we have with adenoviral vector platform vaccines is with rabies, and rabies in animals. So it delivers a gene that triggers an immune response in all kinds of furry creatures in the forests of Canada, and they are protected from rabies, and therefore they can't transmit rabies to livestock, to humans, et cetera. And we don't hear of any man-eating otters coming out of the waters of Canada. So I don't know what to say, but that's the only experience that we have.
All right, we're going to circle back to our original question and give you the final word again, if you want to sum it up or mention something quickly we haven't covered yet. What reason can you think of that Rhode Island still should be under emergency powers, control by the executive branch, and in a medical state of emergency? Is there any the science reason for that right now?
None. And even if we're obviously has nothing to do with overwhelming the healthcare system. Or even the chance that the healthcare system could be overwhelmed again. I mean, I guess that's the kind of rationale, because it's boiling down now. They basically seem to be targeting a zero COVID strategy.
Right. Yeah, zero COVID,
which
is ridiculous. Can't stop a pandemic.
That's an absurdity, and
shifting goalposts.
Yep. It's a pipe dream, and it's very destructive. I think it's very destructive socially, Mike. And again, I don't want to perseverate too much on this, but that really is why I'm so disturbed with the masking thing. People need to socialize and see each other's faces again, wherever they are. It's just absurd.
Even faces like yours, Andy. Faces like yours.
And yours.
Dr. Andrew Blossom, thanks again for all your expertise on In the Dugout. See you next week.
We'll have some FaceTime later. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Good guy. I like to have some laughs. It's good to have a sense of humor. But listen, he's, this power grab by these government officials, this desperate media want by, Fauci and them to try to make themselves relevant in the media, or to make themselves sound like heroes when all they do is change their minds, change their positions, confuse the public, these are scientists who are giving proclamations and recommendations not based on science. Our guy, Dr. Andrew Blossom, has been consistent from the first time we had him on the show. I think it was September, maybe early October. He has not changed his opinion one iota, and he gives you, every time in the show, we show you the charts, or he cites the science that supports his opinion. Consistent, not only consistent in his judgments and analysis, but consistent in that he's a researcher. He always backs it up with the science. The science of green climate change is not there either. Yet unless this governor takes a stand, Governor McKee, against the far left and against this horrid Green New Deal bill that was passed in Rhode Island, both the House and Senate, will soon be on his desk. Unless he takes a stand, again, non-scientific assumptions are fueling a public policy, a major public policy that's going to cost all of us dearly. The left say they are the ones who follow the science. Nothing could be further from the truth, folks. And then the ultimate one yesterday with Dr. Michelle Cretella, that you can have a surgery, take a few hormones, click your heels together, and magically, scientifically, somehow you can turn yourself from a male to a female. False. That is not the science. Yep. As we discussed, even medical doctors try to tell you it's scientifically true. It's unbelievable how people are brainwashed. Again, we've said being woke means you have blinders on. You only see what your woke masters tell you to see, regardless of how ridiculous, regardless of how much it comes or emanates from the land, never land of make believe. That's you only see what your woke masters tell you to see. And public policy is being based on these non-scientific fake narratives that's killing our state. It has been killing our state for years, and it looks like it's about to kill our country. We'll keep informing you. I wish we could do more to alter the course. That's up to you. That's up to you to subscribe and to get more people to listen, and then hopefully vote some of these clowns out of office. But that's for another day.